and respected teachers and our beloved students. It is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Department of Zoology, Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Centenary College, to the present session of seminar, which is under the DBT Star College program. And the title of the seminar is And As We Moved, We Embraced and We Absorbed. So without further delay, I would like to request our respected Vice Principal Maharaj to felicitate Professor Partha Majumder. Now, I'd like to request respected Vice Principal Maharaj to give a welcome address for this session of seminar. Maharaj.
Respected Dr. Partha Pratim Majumder sir on the dais, respected teachers, staff members and dear students. Today we are really fortunate to have Dr. Partha Pratim Majumder amongst us for his special talk this afternoon. He is, without any introduction, he is one of the most renowned scientists of India, one of having lots of contribution. You will understand gradually as sir will speak about his topic. And so without much introduction, I would just like to welcome sir on behalf of Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Centenary College, Rahara, and on behalf of the Department of Zoology organizing this seminar as a part of the DBT Star College scheme. I would also request all our students to interact with sir after the talk, try to gather wisdom from sir. So it is a rare opportunity to have sir amidst us, and sir has already come here earlier to enlighten our students, and this is another occasion where we have got him. So again, I welcome Dr. Partha Pratim Majumder, and I welcome you all to today's afternoon seminar. With these few words, I welcome sir again. Namaskar.
Professor Partha Pratim Majumder needs no introduction. In our scientific community, we all know him as PPM sir. And so Professor Partha Pratim Majumder has more than 300 publications in different international journals. He had made significant contributions in human genetics and evolution using statistical, molecular genetic and anthropological methods. And Professor Majumder has devised innovative statistical methods for solving biological problems related to modes of inheritance of complex human traits. He was one of the early human geneticists to recognize the importance of studying genetic structures of ethnic populations using molecular genetic tools. His work on genetic diversity of ethnic Indian populations has resulted in a clear reconstruction of the process of peopling in Indian subcontinent, which have had major impacts on the design of studies for mapping disease genes. So, without further delay, I would like to request Professor Majumder to give his talk about the And As We Moved and We Embraced and We Absorbed. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I thank Maharaja for introducing me and felicitating me, and it's really a pleasure to be back here on this podium. I've titled my talk as, and as we moved, we embraced and we absorbed. Nobody understands the title, right? No one here understands what I'm going to talk about. Is there anyone who understands what I'm going to talk about? No one, right? So what I'm going to do is to unfold each one of these phrases as I go along. This is really not the work that I have done that I'm going to describe to you. There will be just about 2 minutes of our own work that I will enmesh or sort of put it together, juxtapose with what I'm going to talk about. Essentially, what this talk is all about is to explain to you the work of the person who got a Nobel Prize last year in physiology or medicine. Do you know his name? Does anyone know his name? Who won the Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine in 2022? No? Good. Svante Pääbo is his name, right? So essentially what I'm going to do is to explain to you the work that was done by Svante Pääbo, for which he's gotten the Nobel Prize, and what was the work. And obviously it must be something very, very significant, otherwise one would not get a Nobel Prize. So he's done some very significant work. It's also interesting that he has got a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine, but he has worked on human evolution. And that's kind of odd because one does not work on human evolution and get a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. This is the first time in the history of Nobel Awards that an evolutionary biologist has gotten an award, a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. As a matter of fact, in any of the subdomains of in which Nobel Awards are given. So this is the first time in history of Nobel Awards that an evolutionary biologist, an evolutionary geneticist has been awarded with a Nobel Prize. So we are all very proud. I'm particularly proud because this gentleman is also a close friend of mine for many years. And I've known his work. We have done things together, thought through various things together. But of course, he's significantly different from me because he's been able to do some kinds of technologies and technological work that has led to an understanding, a deep understanding of human evolution. So that's what I'm going to describe to you. Still, the title of my talk cannot be clear to you, but as I said, that I'm going to make it clear as I unfold. Now, this is going to be a challenge. Let me see. Let me put it this way. Are you able to hear me now? Are you able to hear me now? Yeah? Okay. All right. So this may be easier for me. So this is Svante Pääbo. Of course, it's a cartoon. It's a sketch. And the Nobel citation. Just give me a second. Oh, yeah. The Nobel citation says that he has been awarded the Nobel Prize. Oh, good. That's it. Oh, acha. Okay. Is this better? Is this better? Are you able to hear me? Good. So the Nobel citation, everyone who gets a Nobel Prize gets a citation, a plaque on which something is written. Why has he been awarded the Nobel Prize? That's called a citation. And the citation for Svante Pääbo stated that he's been awarded the Nobel Prize for his discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct hominins. Hominins are our ancestors who eventually became modern humans. Extinct hominins and human evolution. So that's the reason why he's been awarded the Nobel Prize. So I'm going to describe the context in which he got the Nobel Prize. So I'm actually contextualizing the reason why he got the Nobel Prize. And I'm going to tell you a story, and my story begins about 5 to 10 million years ago. When I say 5 to 10 million years, in human evolution, as you go back in time, we are never sure of the dates because the evidence on which these dates are estimated are very fragmentary. We don't have solid piece of evidence to be absolutely sure of the date. So oftentimes you'd find, all of you know the word standard deviation, the phrase standard deviation or variance. All of these dates will have a very large standard deviation associated with it. So I'm going to talk about these dates that embraces a long period of time, but such is the nature of our science. So about sometime between 5 and 10 million years ago, all of us humans, we had a common ancestor, and we shared our common ancestor with the gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos and all of these apes. And then we also were humans, and from the common ancestor, we split into two branches. One branch led to the modern humans, like people like us, and another branch gave rise to these species such as the gorillas, the chimpanzees, the bonobos, and so on. Right? So these, the gorillas, chimpanzees, are our closest cousins in some way. They are very highly related to us. I'll jump now from about 5 to 10 million years. I'm jumping 6 million years and coming to about 4 million years. So about 4 million years, something very interesting happened in human evolution. We were walking on 4 feet or knuckles. We were knuckle walkers like this. But about 4 million years ago, we attained a bipedal gait. We began to walk upright. And that was a major feature in human evolution, and this took place about 4 million years ago. And the genus, the animal that actually became bipedal is called Australopithecus. Australopithecus is the first animal that became upright and had a bipedal gait and started to walk on 2 feet. And of course, in this genus Australopithecus, we have several species. These species are variously named, such as Anamensis, Afarensis, and so on and so forth. I'll talk about Afarensis a little bit because some of you may know Afarensis, primarily because it hit the newspaper headlines at one point of time. This is Australopithecus afarensis, and how do we know that about 4 million years ago we had an upright gait? So this is a volcanic rock. A volcano erupted, there was molten lava, and the lava flew along this path, and then it got solidified because it cooled down and it got solidified. Just before it got solidified, somebody walked on this lava bed, and the footprints were left. And if you read these footprints, it's quite easy. Even those of us who are not very trained to understand these footprints, we can figure out that this person had a bipedal gait. Because if you are a knuckle walker, if you walk on 4 feet, this is not the pattern of footprints that you would see. This is the pattern of footprints for those of us who walk on 2 feet. And this solid piece of rock can be dated. There are ways of dating these rock bodies, and this piece of rock has been dated to 3.7 million years. So roughly about 4 million years ago, we became bipedal and we started walking upright, and we obtained a bipedal gait. This was discovered in this rock bed, was discovered and dated in 1975 by a very famous person. Her name is Mary Leakey. The Leakey family spent several generations in Africa digging fossils and trying to understand human evolution, and this is one of the major high points in their life, in the life of the Leakey family, because they have been spending time in Africa looking at these kinds of evidence. So this is testimony to an upright gait, and this is 3.7 million years. We can approximate it to about 4 million years. I'll jump another 2 million years and I come to about 2 million years, 1.9 million years ago. This is when our genus arose, the genus Homo. So we arose about 2 million years ago, and this is the origin of the genus Homo, and we arose in Africa. And one of the characteristic features of our genus is that we learned to use stone tools. We could manufacture stone tools, and we could manufacture tools, and at that time stone tools, and this was a landmark in the history of our evolution, in the history of evolution of modern humans. Once we arose, once the genus Homo arose, we began to spin off many different species of Homo. So you can look at the various kinds of Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, Homo antecessor, and so on and so forth. So many different species of Homo arose. One of those species is called Homo heidelbergensis. Another species is called Homo neanderthalensis, commonly known as the Neanderthal man. Many of you may have heard about the Neanderthal man. So, and we are of course called Homo sapiens. So this arose over a period of 2 million years, and we have been on the face of this planet, Homo sapiens, for maybe about 500,000 years. We were preceded by very many other species of humans. Today there are 21 known species of humans, and more are being discovered. The last species of Homo last species in the genus Homo that was discovered in 2018. So this is called Homo longi, and it was discovered only in 2018. So you can imagine that there are already 21 known species of Homo, and the last one was only discovered 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So it's interesting that there probably remains more species in the genus to which we belong, more species to be discovered, and we'll keep that towards the end. Like I said, that our evolution is like a tree. There is a root of the tree, which is our ancestor, and from that ancestor we bifurcate and we grow into other kinds of genera and species. And so this is Homo erectus. Like I said, that about 2 million years ago Homo erectus arose. So not Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, and then Homo erectus arose about 1 million years ago, and then it started to make branches and give rise to many other different kinds of species. I spoke about Homo erectus, preceded by Homo antecessor, and so on and so forth. As you can see, that some of these branches that are branching off from this major trunk of the tree, Homo erectus, antecessor, etc., these branches, there is no continuity of these branches. These branches sort of die, which essentially means that some of these species that arose, that evolved, actually became extinct. So many of these species became extinct, and that's the hallmark of evolution, survival of the fittest. So if you're unfit in some environment, you actually become, your numbers decline, and then you become extinct. So that has happened to many of our ancestral species. This is a reconstruction of what's called Homo heidelbergensis. So this is the Heidelberg man, and as you can see that, this man looks very much like us, very much like one of us. And if I didn't tell you that this was Homo heidelbergensis belonging to another species, perhaps we could mistake it from some member of our own species, Homo sapiens. The Heidelberg man gave rise to different kinds of species, such as the Neanderthal man. You must have heard about the Neanderthal man for sure. You may not have heard about the Denisovans, and I'm going to tell you about the Denisovans, and of course Homo sapiens is us. So we are Homo sapiens. And this branch of the tree arose from Homo heidelbergensis about between 400 and 300 years ago, and we arose about 150 to 130,000 years ago. So our species is quite modern, quite recent in the time scale of human evolution, which is about 4 million years. So what Svante Pääbo has done is that he has analyzed DNA, and the major breakthrough that he was able to do is to isolate DNA from fossils from our ancestors, very old ancestors, and was able to isolate DNA from there and be able to sequence that DNA and reconstruct human evolution. This was no easy task, primarily because many of us thought that these remains that we find, ancestral remains that we find under the ground, if we can bring them up and analyze their DNA, find the DNA sequence, we may be able to relate that DNA sequence with DNA sequence of other species that will provide a much better reconstruction of human evolution. Up until now, human evolution has primarily been reconstructed using these fossil remains. You get one broken skull or one broken leg, and from there you are trying to reconstruct human evolution, trying to reconstruct what that broken bone belonged to which species, etc. And that's a lot of speculation involved, because the amount of evidence contained in one broken skull or one broken bone is very fragmentary. On the other hand, if you could sequence the DNA, then you know for sure, how that DNA sequence is related to the DNA sequence of other organisms. We all dreamt, 40 years ago or 30 years ago, we all dreamt that we should be able to do this, and it wasn't possible. It was very difficult to make that happen, and it was Svante Pääbo who was actually able to do it, and that's one reason why that's the main reason why he got the Nobel Prize. We know that the human DNA has about 3 billion nucleotides. These are like alphabets. It's a linear string, so it's like a sentence containing 3 billion alphabets. And the DNA of any two individuals, modern humans, is 99.9% similar. So we are only about 0.1% dissimilar, but that 1% of the 3 billion translates to 3 million, which is 3 into 10 to the power of 6. So that's a large number of differences between any two individuals. Those are the kinds of differences that contain information about how two individuals are related. If the segments of DNA that are exactly the same among individuals carries no information, cannot provide any information about relationship between two individuals. Where there are differences, depending on how many differences are there, so let's say that we take two individuals where of these 3 million nucleotides that are different, there are 100 nucleotides that are different between two individuals. And we take another two individuals where there are, let's say, 10 differences. The ones where there are 10 differences, those two individuals are more closely related to each other than the two individuals where there are 100 differences, right? So that's the way that we try and reconstruct human evolution, and that's what is usually done. All right, and there are various kinds of reasons why these changes come about, why two DNA sequences become different, and these are called mutations. These mutations happen because we expose ourselves to various chemicals, various air pollutants, rays of the sun, ultraviolet rays of the sun, and so on and so forth. Also, there are biological reasons. There are reasons, in the copying process of the DNA, errors creep in. These are mostly corrected, but sometimes they remain uncorrected, and that's how those changes that happen in an individual gets transmitted to the next generation. And then that change persists over a period of time. That's how we sort of become different from one another, or our DNA sequences acquire changes, and those changes are then passed on from one generation to the next. All right, so the first point that I want to make is that we, as modern humans, we evolved in Africa. And how do we know that? How do we know we evolved in Africa? Wherever you evolved, if you have evolved for a very long period of time, then many changes will accumulate, right? These changes, these mutations are happening during a generation, and then it gets transmitted to the next generation. That generation again accumulates some changes, and then that gets transmitted to the next generation, and so on. So if any particular region, if people in any particular region evolved for a long period of time, they would have much more number of mutations, much more genetic diversity within them than another region where the evolution was for a shorter period of time. And if you quantify the amount of diversity, genetic diversity, what one finds is that the genetic diversity in Africa, so along the x-axis is some measure of genetic diversity. So what one sees is that the extent of genetic diversity among humans in Africa is the largest, and the extent of genetic diversity among individuals in Asia is the second largest. And what you see is that Europe, Australia, New Guinea, these regions have much less genetic diversity than either Africa or Asia. So what the inference from here is that we evolved in Africa, and then we came out of Africa and then moved around in places, and we spent one of the first places that we came to was Asia, and therefore we evolved in Asia for a long period of time, and that's the reason why Asia has the second highest genetic diversity among the humans. So this is all logical inferences based on data, and our data comprises DNA sequence data and comparison of DNA sequences between groups of individuals living in Africa, living in Asia, living in Europe, and so on and so forth. I'll skip this. It's the same thing. Also, you can look at signatures. Our DNA also contains signatures, and these signatures are quite interesting. These signatures actually can be arranged in such a way that the oldest signatures are on the left and the newest signatures are on the right. This is like the trunk of the tree. This is the oldest branch. This is the second oldest branch, and so on. So this is this kind of signature, or signatures on the left are the older signatures than signatures on the right. And if you look at the distribution of these signatures, what one will find is that the oldest signatures, like the D, like the A, this is A, the white is the E. So the oldest signatures are mostly in high frequencies in Africa, and the newest signatures like Q and R, these are new signatures. You find them in, this is called the New World. You find them in the Americas. The New World is separated from the Old World by the Bering Strait, and humans then came out of Africa, populated Asia, and then moved on to populate the Americas, the New World, by crossing the Bering Strait. And therefore, what one finds is that this is consistent with what I just said, that humankind lived in Africa for the longest period of time, and they evolved in Africa, came out of Africa, and then we moved on and went and populated Americas, which is the New World. So, so this essentially tells you the first phrase of my title, and as we moved. So we actually evolved and we moved. What happened as we moved? That's the next phrase that we embraced, and I'll explain to you what I mean by we embraced. This is again more of the same. That doesn't really matter. So we can time ourselves. When did we? So we evolved in Africa, but when did we evolve in Africa? The best estimate is that we evolved in Africa about 150,000 years ago. And this is a skull of a modern human that was found in Ethiopia, again by a member of the Leakey family. Remember the Leakey family I talked about, Mary Leakey? This is another member of the Leakey family called Richard Leakey, who actually found this skull, which has been dated to about 130,000 years. So roughly somewhere between 150,000 and 130,000 years we evolved in Africa. And then, like I also pointed out, that we evolved in Africa, and then we moved around. We came to Asia, we moved around, we went to Europe, and eventually went to the Americas. So that's the movement that we have encountered. What happened when we came out of Africa? We were expecting to see elephants, and we were expecting to see tigers, and we were expecting to see lions and all of that, right? We were not expecting to see ourselves or our cousins. So we believed that we evolved in Africa, and there was elsewhere, there was nobody who looked like us. So unfortunately, we came out, well, unfortunately, I don't know, surprisingly, we came out and saw that we were not alone. There were other people who looked like us, quite similar. And these are people like, you know, Neanderthal man and Denisovan. I will introduce the Denisovan to you. Essentially, we came out of Africa and saw that there were human-like people who were roaming around. They were also upright. They also had a bipedal gait and were walking around in other parts of outside of Africa. What did we do to them is something that's quite interesting, and that's what I would explain to you, and that's where the major contribution of Svante Pääbo came along. So we met at least two other species of our cousins on the Europe-Asia landmass. One's called the Neanderthal man. So we met the Neanderthals. They were already there in Europe and Asia, and we met them after we came out of Africa. And also we met the Denisovans, and Denisovans are again very similar to the Neanderthals, but they are called Denisovans primarily because they were found in a cave. A little bone was found in a cave in Siberia, which is called the Denisova cave, and whoever lived there was different from the Neanderthals. And how do we know that they were different from the Neanderthals? Again, this was a contribution of Svante Pääbo. He was able to isolate DNA from here and was able to isolate DNA from the Neanderthals. sequenced the two bits of DNA and found that the two sequences of DNA were so dissimilar with respect to each other that they could not belong to the same species. They had to belong to two different species. So essentially what he showed was that whoever lived in this cave, which he termed as the Denisovans, because the cave is known as Denisova, the Denisovans were different from the Neanderthals. So we met at least two other species when we came out of Africa, after we met them, we now know that Neanderthals don't exist anymore. We exist, but Neanderthals don't exist anymore. They became extinct. How did they become extinct? And similarly, the Denisovans don't exist anymore. How did they become extinct? And that was again a puzzle which Svante Pääbo was able to solve. So the Neanderthals were recognized as a separate group, and that recognition came more than 100 years ago primarily through understanding of fossil remains or analysis of fossil remains. And the Neanderthals existed for almost 500,000 years in Europe and West Asia. Again, dating of these bones told us this. But they also appeared about 30 or 40,000 years ago. We came out of Africa about 100,000 years ago. And then we actually met the Neanderthals and we sort of lived together with them for about 60,000 years. Between 30 and 40,000 years ago, they became extinct. So when we sort of mixed with them, what did we do to them? And there are multiple hypotheses that have been floating around in the literature, which essentially Svante Pääbo was able to solve. One is a popular dominant hypothesis was that we beat them to death. We were good tool users and we essentially beat them to death. We clubbed them and we killed them and we exterminated them. The second is that Neanderthals are direct ancestors of present-day Europeans, which essentially means that the Neanderthals were ancestors of modern humans who live in Europe. How could that happen? One way that it could happen, or the most easiest explanation of that happening, is that the modern humans who came out of Africa and the Neanderthals, they interbred and produced the Europeans. So Neanderthals became the direct ancestors of the modern day humans. So these were the two dominant hypotheses, and it was not easy to show which of these two hypotheses is true. But the fact remains that the Neanderthals became extinct about 30 to 40,000 years ago. So did the Denisovans. Denisovans also became extinct at that point of time. And so this man solved the puzzle, and that was a major contribution to evolutionary biology, and that's the reason why he was awarded the Nobel Prize for discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct hominins and human evolution. So the origin of modern humans is that we are less heavily built, we are more mobile, we can move around, and this is a comparison with, for example, the Neanderthals or the Denisovans. We are less heavily built, we are more mobile, and more importantly, we have a higher cognition. And this higher cognition, of course, makes us more intelligent and this, that, and the other. However, we must note that the human and Neanderthal brains are roughly the same size. In spite of having, normally you would expect that somebody who has a higher cognition will also have a larger amount of gray matter in the brain. So the brain size or the brain volume would be larger. But us and the Neanderthals had roughly the same brain volume as estimated from the various skull remains, skull fossils that were discovered. But then, I'm not going to go through this. More recently, we now have an explanation as to why we, modern humans, have a better cognition than Neanderthals, and that happens because of certain neurological features in the brain. We have a larger number of neurons in the brain compared to the Neanderthals, and that's the reason why, in spite of the fact that we have the same brain volume, we have a higher cognitive ability. So it's because of the greater amount of neurons, and this paper was published only in September of last year, that provided us with an understanding of how we have a better cognition compared to the Neanderthals in spite of having the same brain volume. This is a cave in Croatia, where Croatia, as you know, is near the Adriatic Sea, on the shore of the Adriatic Sea. And this is a cave in Croatia where a fossil was found, and from a Neanderthal fossil was found, and from that Neanderthal fossil they were able to isolate DNA and sequence that DNA. And that's the first, so they found these bones, and from that bones they were able to isolate the DNA, and these bone fragments were dated to be about 40,000 years old, and DNA was extracted from the bones, and was used to generate a draft sequence. It's called a draft sequence, draft DNA sequence, primarily because the entire DNA, 3 billion alphabets of the DNA could not be sequenced. We could only sequence, or they could only sequence about 50% of the 3 billion nucleotides that there is in the human DNA, or even Neanderthal DNA. So it was called a draft sequence. I'm going to skip this, but just to point out one or two factors. These DNA molecules, or the individual has been dead for 40,000 years, right? This the bones that I showed you, they were dated to be 40,000 years. And there were little muscle that was attached to the bones. Those bones, the DNA contained in the cells of that particular tissue that was attached to the bone must have been lying for 40,000 years. And you can imagine that, for 40,000 years, if it's been exposed to various weathering conditions and so on and so forth, the DNA, which is the biological molecule, would get fragmented, would get degraded, and so on and so forth. So that's what happens. So with those degraded pieces of DNA, if you are going to reconstruct the entire DNA sequence, it's no easy chore. It's a huge amount of expertise that's required in the experimental lab and in the computational lab to sequence the DNA and to put together the small fragments of the DNA into one long sequence. And that was a major challenge which Svante Pääbo was able to overcome. I'm going to skip. These are quite technical, so I'll skip those. So if you look at a bunch of human DNA, so this is like the human DNA sequence from 6 humans. And what you see is that there are these blue stars and blue circles, etc., that are available in all of the 6 humans. Either they have a star or a circle, but the blue dots and stars, etc., they are all available in the 6 humans. You also notice that there are these red squares and triangles that are only contained in some humans but not in all. Now, where did these red stars and red squares and triangles come from? And that was a puzzle for a very long period of time, and until they were able to sequence a number of Neanderthals. And when they sequenced a number of Neanderthals, and the 3 Neanderthals, they found that in the Neanderthal genome, at these positions, there was this square, and at this position, there was this circle, and some individuals, some humans, had acquired or inherited this red squares. 2 of these individuals, 2 of these 6 humans inherited the red square, and 1 of the humans, the 3rd human being here, inherited a triangle from the Neanderthals. Now, how do you get Neanderthal DNA into our own DNA? DNA doesn't fly from one species to another. Something must happen for us to be able to get Neanderthal DNA, and the only explanation is that we interbred with them. When you interbreed, your maternal DNA and paternal DNA combine to form the child's DNA. So if you had a if you had a Neanderthal mother and a Homo sapiens father, they would combine, and the next child would have 50% of the genome comprising the Neanderthals and 50% of the genome comprising the Homo sapiens. And that's how you would get these red pieces and blue pieces, and they would only appear in the children of those of the Neanderthal mother and Homo sapiens father, right? If you had a Homo sapiens father and a Homo sapiens mother, then you would only get the blues and you would not get the reds, because the reds belong to the Neanderthals. So one piece of this DNA evidence showed that we actually interbred with the Neanderthals. So like I said, that we moved around, we met with the Neanderthals, and we embraced them. And we embraced them so tight that we actually interbred with them. And we got pieces of their DNA into our DNA as well. Okay, so that explains the next phrase that I said. And as we moved, we embraced, and we interbred. And that's how we got pieces of the Neanderthal DNA into us. Yeah, and the extent of Neanderthal ancestry is between 1 to 4%. So one or four of humans got a piece of DNA from the Neanderthals, meaning that most of the matings, most of the children that we have today had a human mother and a human father. But about 1 to 4, depending on where they lived, had a Neanderthal father and a human mother, or a Neanderthal mother and a human father. Yeah, and they produce children. So that's about 1 in 4, and that's how you have 1 to 4% of DNA ancestry. Eventually, again, based on very painstaking work, primarily done by Svante Pääbo, as you can see that on all of these, on the draft genome paper, he was the lead author. Here also, he is the lead author. So he is like the leader of this entire group of scientists who were able to sequence the Neanderthal genome. And this was from the Altai Mountains. I'm going to skip this. Very interesting, in the life of a scientist, and many of you will become scientists and you will face failures. We all have faced failures in science. We were trying to show something, and then we undertook experiments, undertook data analysis, and we were failing. We were neither able to support the hypothesis nor able to reject the hypothesis, so we were failing. And then these failures lead to a lot of frustrations. Exactly the same thing happened to Svante Pääbo, and I want to share that frustration with you. He not only was frustrated, but publicly he said things like this: we will never be able to sequence the nuclear genome of a Neanderthal. It's too degraded. I mentioned about degradation of DNA 40,000 years out in the weather, out in the open, and therefore climatic conditions would actually degrade the DNA. It would be almost impossible to sequence. So he said that he would never be able to sequence the nuclear genome. Remember, he got a Nobel Prize primarily because he was able to overcome this and sequence the genome of a Neanderthal. Again, on another occasion, he said that there's just too little DNA there, it can't be done. So, this bone that has been 40,000 years old has a small tissue stuck to it. And then you remove this little tissue, and there may be, maybe 200 cells, and most of those cells would also have degraded DNA, and then you isolate DNA from there and you're trying to sequence. There's just too little DNA there and you cannot actually sequence it. These are public statements out of frustration that Svante Pääbo had made. Later, when he became successful, I also should point out how jubilant he was, how happy he was, and this is the statement that he made. Of course, you should never say things like that, particularly in biology, because you'll often be overtaken by technical developments. The reason for his frustration was that the technologies were not available for him to sequence these pieces of degraded DNA. But when he was able to overcome all of these technological challenges, he himself says that you should never say things like that. Even in frustration, you should not make public comments like that, because it's very difficult to predict what kind of technological challenges there will be in the field of biology where you will be able to succeed, with respect to those questions that you are failing to be able to provide an answer. So this is very interesting, and this is very informative in the life of a scientist. Frustrations happen. Don't get frustrated. You will, if you're at it, you will succeed eventually and be able to become very jubilant, and eventually some of you may actually be awarded the Nobel Prize. Again, lots of Neanderthals have now been sequenced. Again, thanks to Svante Pääbo for the various kinds of technologies that he actually ushered in. He actually discovered or invented, and these are, today we have about 8,000 Neanderthals who have been sequenced. It's amazing that, even 20 years ago, we didn't have one single DNA sequence of a Neanderthal. Today, because of what Svante has been able to do, we have 8,000 DNA sequences from Neanderthals from all over the world. Showed you this particular cave, right? This is called the Denisova cave. Showed you this little finger bone. In this little finger bone, a small tissue was found, DNA was isolated, that was sequenced, and we now have a genetic history of an archaic hominin group from Denisova cave in Siberia. Hominin, you remember, they are our ancestors that led to the humans, Denisovans were our ancestor who lived in these caves in Siberia, and they are our ancestors. And it was then shown that they are very distinct from the Neanderthals and the modern humans. So they were a separate species. They were neither modern humans nor were they Neanderthals, because their DNA sequence is quite different from the modern human sequence, from the Neanderthal sequence, and so they were a separate species. What am I going to say here? I can probably skip this. Some of them we also mixed with Denisovans in various parts of the world, predominantly in Southeast Asia and also in the Pacific Islands. The Neanderthals and Denisovans then became extinct. I said that, but Neanderthals and Denisovans continue to live. They continue to live in us because we have inherited portions of their DNA. So in some ways, we are their, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, although they themselves don't exist anymore. We have inherited their DNA, and a little bit of DNA are in us. Eventually, I'm going to skip this. Also, I want to mention about the work that we have done in this context. I have been involved in trying to understand, the relationships among various ethnic groups that we have in India. And two of the ethnic groups that you have in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, many of you would know the name of a tribal population called Jarwa, who live in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. There is also another tribal group called Onge in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And we sequenced the DNA of some Jarwas and some Onges, and we found that, of course, they had little bits and pieces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, but they also had these little yellow pieces that neither belong to the Neanderthals, nor to the Denisovans, nor to us, not to other modern humans. So we actually looked at the evolution of those yellow pieces of DNA that was embedded in the DNAs of Jarwas and Onges, and we found that they go back to the same time when the Neanderthals and Denisovans lived. So we proposed that there are more species to be discovered, and these come from those undiscovered species. And we actually published this work and provided a genomic analysis of these anomalies. When we completed our work, we also found that another group were working in the Melanesia. Melanesia is this group of islands north of Australia, and there are people who live there, and they isolated DNA from them. And they also said that their genetic study revealed that ancient Melanesians interbred with the mysterious hominid. This mysterious hominid has still not been discovered. So essentially, there are our work and the work done in Melanesia, in this group of islands, points to the fact that there are more human species to be discovered. Today, the 21 species have been discovered in 28, and we have Denisovan DNA. In the various human groups in India, how much of Neanderthal DNA and how much of Denisovan DNA is there? So we tried to estimate that, and what we estimated is that, so these are names of Indian population groups. This is the amount of admixture, or the amount of Neanderthal DNA that we have in our genomes. The amount of Neanderthal DNA that we have in our genomes is between 2 and 3%. Globally, it's between 1 and 4%. Neanderthal admixture, but in our populations we have between 2 and 3%, and globally for Denisovans it varies between 1 and 2%, and what we have here is between 0.08 and 0.4%. So we have more Neanderthal DNA in our DNA, more Neanderthal pieces of DNA in our own DNA, less amount of DNA of the Denisovans that we have in our DNA across, but there is of course variability, as you can see, and that's a range of variability that one can find. One other question that came up, and that's quite natural, so we interbred with the Neanderthals, we interbred with the Denisovans. The natural question is, did the Neanderthals and Denisovans interbreed with each other, right? And of course, that was the most natural question. I won't go through all of this. I will just point out one single individual, which is called Denisova 11. Denisova 11 is half blue and half red. The blue comes from the Denisovans, and the blue comes from the Neanderthals, and the red comes from the Denisovans. So if you have your genome, which is 50% Denisovan, 50% Neanderthals, the only explanation that you can provide is that the Neanderthal was either a father or a mother, and the Denisovan was either a father or a mother, and they two mated and produced this offspring called Denisova 11. So from this, it settles the fact that not only did the Neanderthals mate with us, not only did the Denisovans interbreed with us, but between the Neanderthals and Denisovans, they also interbred. So this completes the entire picture of the three species that, coexisted for about 60,000 years in Asia and Europe. We met them after we came out of Africa about 100,000 years ago. We coexisted with them for about 60,000 years. But then, why did they become extinct? Well, we don't know why they became extinct. Just remember, I showed you that cartoon where we have DNA from the Neanderthals into the humans. Why is there no DNA from the humans into the Neanderthals? That's a puzzle, right? If the Neanderthal is a mother and the humans are a father, then in the children should have 50% Neanderthal and 50% human, right? And therefore, there should be some human DNA, modern human DNA in the Neanderthals. 8,000 Neanderthals have been sequenced, and we don't find any trace of modern human DNA in the Neanderthal DNA. How can that happen? Well, one way, does anybody have an explanation how that can happen? Do you have an explanation? Jara Shilo? Kara? Children. সবাই extinct হয়ে গেল, কেমন করে extinct হবে?
There may be another also. I said 8,000. Sir, I have a...
Well, that's a possibility, very difficult possibility, right? 8,000 people have been sequenced, and we don't find a little bit of human DNA in any of the 8,000. 8,000 is a large sample size. Well, you were going to say something.
I just want to say that a group of Neanderthals interbred with the Homo sapiens.
Yes.
And the rest get detached.
If the red is, for example, Neanderthals, and the blue is the Neanderthals and the red is the human DNA, then if the children go with the human group, they don't go back to the Neanderthal group, and then therefore the Neanderthal group will not get any of the, the 50% human DNA will not go back to the Neanderthal DNA. That's a much simpler model. We were more advanced in some ways because of our cognitive ability. When the children was born of a mating between the Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan and a modern human father, we adopted the children as our own. We did not allow them to go back to the Neanderthal group. So that's a much simpler model than saying that only a small group of Neanderthals mated with the humans, the others did not, and so on and so forth. They were spread all over Europe and Asia. So this is very unlikely. Well, it's not impossible, but it's a much more difficult model, much more complicated model. So the absorption is a much simpler model. That explains the third part of my title. So I showed you that we moved out of Africa. We embraced the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, and we interbred with them, and we absorbed. Who did we absorb? We absorbed the children of these matings. They came with us and did not go back to either the Neanderthals or the Denisovans, and that's the reason why we have their DNA and they don't have our DNA. And over a period of time, if the children went with us, the older Neanderthals and the older Denisovans would die. The younger people are all with the humans, and so what's going to happen over a period of time? The Neanderthal size will decrease, the Denisovan size will decrease, and they will become extinct. That's the simplest model of human evolution, when we do not see any Neanderthals or Denisovans, even though we coexisted with them for about 60,000 years. So that's the model that we all now believe. So this was also published, and as you can see, Svante Pääbo is one of the major authors of this. I'm going to end my talk by showing you some interesting things that were done. So Svante Pääbo also looked at these DNAs of Neanderthals, humans, etc., reconstructed evolution using DNA evidence, but also this DNA evidence impacted or has impacted on our physiology, on our health, and on our disease. And I will give you, well, I think I have two examples, but I'll just stop with one example. This is very recent, right? This is topical. We know about COVID-19. We know about this, coronavirus infection. All of us probably have been infected. Many people have died. Some of us have been infected, but we didn't show so much of symptoms. So we were relatively spared. But many of our relatives, friends actually went to the hospital. Some came back. Many of them died, right? So many of them got severe COVID-19. COVID-19 is the disease that arises because of the coronavirus infection. And this COVID-19, severe COVID-19, not everybody got severe COVID-19. So one question is, why is it that many people got infected? Some people got severe COVID-19 and either recovered or died, but anyway, they got severe COVID-19, and other people did not get severe COVID-19, they got mild disease. So why is that some people got mild disease and some people got severe disease? And there are reasons to believe that it may be, the answer may lie by looking at the genomes. And so lots of us started looking at the genomes, but again, the breakthrough came from Zeeberg and Pebo's work, and essentially what they have been able to show is that that little segment of the DNA that makes you more susceptible to severe COVID-19 disease, that little piece of DNA came from the Neanderthals. I have shown you that there are some pieces of DNA that came from the Neanderthals into the humans, and this particular piece of DNA that predisposes us to severe COVID-19 actually has been derived from the Neanderthals. And he provided great evidence. I'm not going to explain all of this. This variant is actually on chromosome number 3. You can see that. I'm not even going to try to explain what this figure means. It will take me a long time to explain this figure. All that I will say is that you see a large peak here, and this peak corresponds to that segment of the DNA that actually provides susceptibility to severe COVID-19, and this particular piece of DNA on chromosome 3 was derived from Neanderthals. Those who got this piece of DNA from the Neanderthals became susceptible to severe COVID-19. Most people actually did not inherit this piece from the Neanderthals. Yeah, remember that the extent of admixture is only 1 to 4%. And if you look at the number of people who got severe COVID-19 relative to the number of people who got infected, it's about 3% of severe disease, very consistent with the admixture of 1 to 4% with the Neanderthals. So there are other examples, and if you look at that particular segment, how many people in different regions has inherited that particular segment, it's revealing that in India we have a very large fraction. The red fraction is that particular piece of DNA that was inherited from the Neanderthals into our chromosome number 3. And as you can see that India has a very large fraction of individuals who has inherited that particular segment of chromosome number 3 from the Neanderthals. And people in other parts of the world have less frequency of that piece of DNA. I'm going to skip this. So I'm going to skip all of this. So I come to my last slide, and to begin with, none of you knew what my title meant. And I said that, and as we moved, we embraced and we absorbed. So we moved out of Africa. We met the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others, and we embraced them. And not only did we embrace them, we actually interbred with them, and we absorbed the children, and we took the children in our own group. And all of this has been reconstructed using this enormously challenging technology to begin with that Svante Pääbo was able to overcome. And he produced a mass of data that actually supported that we and Neanderthals and Denisovans actually were friends, and we mated and we produced children, etc. We did not club them to death. It was a biological reason why they became extinct, because we took their children into our own laps and we did not return them back to the Neanderthals or the Denisovans. So their numbers declined over a period of 60,000 years. Their numbers continued to decline and they died and they became extinct. So this entire, and also we are able to explain some parts of our susceptibility predisposition to various kinds of diseases, notably severe COVID-19 disease, which impacts on health. So human evolution also can explain human disease, susceptibility to human disease, etc. And that's the overall scheme of things based on which Svante Pääbo and his group has been widely acclaimed, and he, as the leader of this group, has been awarded the Nobel Prize last year. So I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yes. One hand. Yeah, you. Yes.
Sir, I have some questions.
No, wait. He raised his hand first. So let him. I saw his hand. I'll come to you next.
Sir, I have a question that you have said about Onge and Jarowa type.
Yes.
So, because of their interbreed, there was an unknown gene. So, there can be a possibility that due to the interbreeding between the Jarowas and the Onge, there can be a hybrid gene also. So.
No. I think you didn't get it right. It's not the interbreeding between the Jarowas and Onges. The Jarwa genomes and the Onge genomes have not only Neanderthal genomes and the Denisovan genomes, they also have bits and pieces of other genomes that we cannot trace back to any of the known ancestors of humans. So we postulate that there are still human species to be discovered. So it's not the interbreeding between the Jarwas and the Onges. They never interbreed. Yeah? Yes,
Sir, another question.
Yeah.
You said about the because of the interbreeding of the Neanderthals and the human, there was offspring who moved with the mainly human population.
Yes.
So there was an extinction of them. So what can be the favorable reason due to which they avoided Neanderthals and moved with the human?
So, like I said, we will never know for certain how this happened, but one speculation is that we had a better cognition, right? So, in some ways, we probably were more intelligent than the Neanderthals or the Denisovans, and therefore, we when the baby was born, we took the babies with us, and the Neanderthals and Denisovans did not protest. We would never know for sure why that happened. So these are only reconstructions, these are only models based on data, and this is the most plausible model that we can think of for Neanderthals and Denisovans not having inherited human DNA.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, your turn. Go ahead.
Sir, are Neanderthal related to Homo sapiens in evolution?
Are Neanderthals related to?
Homo sapiens in evolutionary relationships or not?
Well, Neanderthals and humans both arose from the Heidelberg man, right? So, in some ways, the Heidelberg man is the ancestor of both the Neanderthals and the humans.
And my another question is why current apes or chimpanzees are not evolving to Homo sapiens?
Because we are evolving in two different branches of the tree. So, the gorillas, chimpanzees will not evolve to humans because we are proceeding along two different lines of descent, as they call it, evolutionary lines of descent.
Sir, today we are not facing that kind of trouble. Can we evolve? Are we evolving today still at the same pace?
Pace we would never know, but evolution never stops. So we are still evolving. We would not know the pace of evolution until many, many thousands of years later. All of us will have been dead by then. But certainly evolution does not stop.
Hello sir, my name is Shagnik Goswami. It was a great pleasure to hear your talk. Sir, my question is,
is there a relationship between becoming disease prone and genetically less variant? As you have said in your talk that the Americans and the people of Europe, which we knew as the New World, relatively newer than the Asian and African people, in which the genetical variations are more. And diversity is more than Europe and America.
Right.
So, is there any relationship of disease and death tolls we have noticed during the COVID-19?
Yes, of course. Because we were more susceptible to the severe COVID disease. Therefore, of the proportion of people infected, the proportion of people with severe COVID-19 was definitely higher in India compared to those in Europe or Americas. Yes.
Sir, my second question is also related to this theory that maybe a possibility arises that the extinction of Neanderthals and the Denisovan people that you are talking about can be due to a catastrophe or a disease that we survived due to huge genetic variations among us, but they couldn't survive as they were genetically less heterozygous and more homozygous. Or
we don't know that. We don't know that. What makes you think that they were less heterogeneous or less diverse than the humans? I've never said that.
Is there any possibility that they can?
The chances are very small that it was a catastrophic death, because then we would be able to find a large number of people who are dead at the same period of time.
Okay.
And we would be able to estimate that from the DNA sequences.
Okay.
8,000 DNA sequences are now available in the databases. So chances are very slim.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. It was a great lecture. And,
Thank you.
And sir, I have a question. It is related to one of I saw many science documentaries where I heard this phrase many times, that the lifespan of the Neanderthals were much lesser than the lifespan of the Homo sapiens. Is there any evidence, or is this any technically correct, or is
It's technically correct. As a matter of fact, I could. You can also look this up. That 2,000 years ago, our lifespan was much shorter than the lifespan now.
yeah?
The the lifespan at birth has been increasing over several decades. Better medical care, better child care, and better nutrition of the mother that has led to a longer lifespan.
But it has been said that in those science documentaries that that the time to take the time between adulthood and the old age was much more in the Homo sapiens than the Neanderthals.
Time to what? I'm sorry.
Time in the adulthood, time to get into the adulthood was much more greater in the Homo sapiens than in the Neanderthals.
That means we spend more time in childhood and adolescence.
Yeah.
I honestly don't have an answer to your question. I don't know this. I've not heard this. You may be true, and there may be some evidence. I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So we have always heard that it was a constant evolution, but in the phylogenetic tree which we saw, there was Homo erectus had a different branch,
Yes.
and they got extinct.
Yes.
Sir, is there genomics studied that they are related? That
No.
we are
The oldest genomes that have been sequenced are that of the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, who lived about 100,000 years ago.
So on what basis the phylogenetic tree is made that they got extinct?
From
and
the
there's no-
fossil evidence.
So
Because we have not found any fossil, either skulls or bones, that can be dated back beyond the time when we said that they became extinct.
And there are no relation with us, no genomic sequencing.
No, we can't.
Yes, sir, that's very.
40,000 years is a long time for a DNA to be preserved, and it was not easy to sequence those DNAs. Homo erectus lived much before then, almost 2 million years ago, 1 million years ago. That's almost difficult, almost impossible.
Thank you.
Sure.
স্যার ইফ দ্য ডিজিজ দ্যাট হি ইজ টকিং অ্যাবাউট যেটা হচ্ছে ওই নিয়ান্ডারথালসদেরকে অ্যাটাক করবে, তাহলে তো সেটা ওই যে চাইল্ডগুলো তখন এক্সিস্ট করছিল তাদেরকেও তো ওটা স্প্রেড করতে পারতো তাদের মধ্যে।
করতে পারতো, করেছে কিনা আমরা জানি না,
সো ওই থিওরিটা অতটা প্রপার তো হবে না
জানি না আমরা, বাট অল দ্যাট উই নো, অল দ্যাট উই আর ট্রাইং টু, আমরা কি টেস্ট করার চেষ্টা করছি যে ওদের আমরা মেরে ফেলেছি না ওরা অন্য কোনো কারণে এক্সটিংক্ট হয়েছে। বাচ্চাগুলোর কি হয়েছে সেটা নিয়ে তো আমাদের কোনো হাইপোথেসিস নেই রাইট নাও, সো উই হ্যাভ নট টেস্টেড দ্যাট, রাইট? সো বাচ্চাগুলো নিয়ান্ডারথালের কাছ থেকে ডিএনএ পেয়ে তারা বেশি সাসেপ্টেবল হয়ে তারা আরও তাড়াতাড়ি মরে গেছে কিনা এখনো পর্যন্ত সেই এভিডেন্সটা কেউ খোঁজেনি। খুঁজলে কি পাওয়া যাবে আমি স্পেকুলেট করতে পারবো না।
Any more question?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, you said the risk factor in COVID is due to the presence of Neanderthal gene in our DNA, India's DNA.
I've never said that. I've said severe COVID-19.
Severe COVID-19. And we have the most part of Neanderthal gene in our DNA.
That particular fragment is very frequent in our DNA.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
But the severity of COVID, as we saw earlier in the pandemic period, it was more severe in the North American parts.
How do you know that? No, data don't show that. Data don't show that. Data shows that we had more severe relative to the number of infections. Please remember that many more people got infected early on in the United States or in Europe. Relative to the number of infections, the people who got the proportion of people who got severe COVID-19 was much more in India compared to the US or
Also,
Europe.
more deaths have occurred in United States.
More, see, you're always thinking about numbers, absolute numbers. Absolute numbers is not what is important, because absolute numbers will depend on how many people got infected. So early on, many more people number of people who got infected in Europe or in United States was much higher than in India. Our spread of the disease came a little later. Right? Earliest was in Italy, and from there it spread to other parts of Europe. Then they traveled to United States, and airlines and so on and so forth, they took the disease to the United States. It spread there very fast. We were somehow protected at that time. So if you look at the data tables now, and data tables are actually available freely on the internet, and if you calculate the proportions, you will see that India had more severe COVID-19 cases compared to United States or Europe.
Yes.
All right, I think we should stop. Okay, one last question, because I have another meeting of the college.
Sir, my name is Akash.
Hi.
I have a question. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens are distinct species,
Yes.
then how are they able to interbreed between themselves if the biological species concept is assumed to be true? Because it is said that a species is formed when there is reproductive isolation.
Yeah, you know what, again, it's going to take me a long time to discuss this with you. Those kinds of definitions of species have actually given way to more relaxed definitions of species. Reproductive isolation does not necessarily mean that they cannot reproduce and produce children. But again, that's a long discussion, and I don't want to open it up right now.
Sir, then if we have interbreed with Neanderthals and Denisovans, then we, the Homo sapiens, are perhaps not the same species as the ones who first mated with Neanderthals, because we have the genome of both of them. We have the genome of Homo sapiens as well as Neanderthals,
Right. Right.
Denisovans.
But,
so aren't we distinct from them?
Well, in some ways, yes, but we only have about 1 to 4% of our genome belonging to the Neanderthals. Now, is 1 to 4% large enough to make us distinct from that species? So, if it was, 40%, I would say you are 100% correct. But 1 to 4% is so minuscule that it's very difficult to decide that they are a different species all the way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such an wonderful, fascinating and insightful lecture. Now, I would like to request Professor Dr. Pradut Kumar Midda, Head of the Department of Zoology, to give the vote of thanks.
Oh, Mike, sure. Hey.
Just now, we had an excellent lecture from Professor Partha Pratim Majumder, Director, NIBMG, Kalyani, and a distinguished scientist in the field of human genetics and genomics, statistical genetics, and population genetics. Professor Majumder, one-time postdoctoral fellow of Human Genetics Center, University of Texas, and one-time professor of Anthropology and Human Genetics Unit, ISI, Kolkata, today talked on as we moved, we embraced, and as we moved, we embraced and we absorbed. Actually, he talked about our evolution, about human evolution. As we are humans, our ancestry, our origin, our evolution are of great importance to us, are of utmost importance to us. He made reference about the Svante Pääbo, the Swedish geneticist, and who got 2022 Nobel Prize in Medicine for his outstanding work on human genomics of the fossil hominins and human evolution. Pääbo, he told that Pääbo extracted DNA and sequenced it from a small bone and of the Neanderthals. And he told that modern humans took origin in Africa and later migrated out of Africa and spread it to different parts of the world. And Pääbo also discovered DNA and sequenced it from a small finger bone found in the Denisova cave of Siberia. And he compared this data, the sequence data, with the modern humans, and he found that there was interbreeding between the Neanderthal people and the modern humans, interbreeding between the Denisova people and modern humans. And it was later also found that there was also interbreeding between the Denisova and Neanderthals. Okay? He talked about no, ঠিক আছে. He told that there are about 21 species of humans, and evidences indicate that there are more species to be discovered. And by comparing, he told that the modern humans are more superior than the Neanderthals by virtue, because they have greater number of neurons in their brain. So this led to their greater cognitive ability. And he also spoke about the different aspects of the other things, and Onge and Jarua, the Andaman people, they also bear Denisova genome and Neanderthal genome. Besides, there are some specific other unknown genome. So we came to know many unknown facts of the human evolution. So Professor Majumder, in spite of his busy schedule, have come to our college, have enriched us and our students. So on behalf of the college, I express my heartfelt thanks to him. I also thank the college administration for organizing this seminar. And lastly, I thank all the students for their patient hearing. Thank you all once again.